I'm here with
Julia Senzon, Editor-in-Chief.
So, Julia, you recently were elected to Editor-in-Chief for the 143rd Board. Can you tell me more about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Julia. I'm from Central New Jersey. I'm a junior majoring in Communication and Information Science. And my journey at The Sun briefly looks like news editor to managing editor to editor-in-chief.
And what will you say you've learned throughout your years at The Sun in terms of like managing the paper and kind of taking on this role as kind of the face of our organization?
Yeah, so while I've been a news editor and a managing editor, I've learned that organization is the baseline of innovation for a successful newspaper. You need systems in place. You need to make sure that email's being sorted, that we have spreadsheets, and I hope to take that to editor-in-chief to have a more successful paper.
Yeah, and as editor-in-chief, your tasks are going to look a little bit different. So, before you used to manage all the content from our objective sections, now you're going to be working on editorials and more of like the overall structure of the paper. So what's your vision for the following year? What's the Cornell Daily Sun going to look like?
I want the Cornell Daily Sun to be a place that fosters conversation. We do a great job of breaking the news. We do a great job of following up on that coverage. But sometimes our coverage kind of stops there. And I want to make sure that we're a place where people can interact with us, feel that they can put their own opinions out there, whether that be commenting our Instagram posts or what we hope have people submit guest columns and letters to the editor.
Yeah, and speaking of opinion content, you're going to be handling editorials from now on. What can we expect from you in terms of editorials?
Yeah, like I said, I want the Sun to be a place that fosters conversation. I think that journalism is one of the pillars of democracy, and I hope to convey that as well in my pieces. So I want to drive home the ideas of democracy, the ideas of diversity of thought, the ideas of fostering a place for every person, any study at Cornell, and making sure our content reflects that.
Yeah, and like you said, you are majoring in information science and communications. How have you implemented that knowledge into our coverage?
Yeah, I'll say that from a communication standpoint, I've used some of the theories that I've learned to ensure that we're representing the full truth. One of the most important theories that I've learned about in communication is the idea that even if you're obtaining all perspectives, that might not be reflective of the truth. A big example of this is with climate change. A lot of times broadcast journalism has put Bill Nye next to a climate denier, and they thought that's an example of unbiased coverage. Just because you have two sides does not mean that you're actually representing consensus. So in reality, when you have over 99% of scientists believing in climate change, endorsing climate change, it actually is misleading to put a 50-50 split. So it's something that I've driven home in our coverage is representing the context of perspectives, not just the perspectives themselves, representing who is feeling a certain way, how they interact with that branch of campus and what that side of campus looks like. And then when you were talking about information science, that's actually helped me quite a lot with media law and knowledge law. I've learned a lot. I'm actually a teaching assistant for choices and consequences in computing. If you've taken Info 1260, you'll know that talks a lot about defamation and libel, which is really important to know as a journalist. And then something that's a little bit more on the technical side, practically I've had a big dedication to using visual representation in articles, so using graphs. So an example of that recently was taking the Ted Cruz investigation on research on National Science Foundation research. That was a database of almost, around 4,000 studies, right? And it's hard when you see that to see how it affects Cornell. What I was able to do was to look through that data, take away the Cornell relevant studies, and then analyze what % of those studies are still ongoing, and to also look at what boxes these studies fall under that are the reason that they're being criticized, whether that be gender or the references of race or status. I also did some more data analysis during the encampments looking into across the Ivy League which Ivy League institutions had the most arrests and which had the least arrests, and making a bit of a heat map over that.
Yeah, so, you're a seasoned sound journalist, and you've had some experience working in journalism as well. So I'd like to ask you, what's your favorite story that you've written for the paper?
Yeah, one of my favorite stories is actually slightly controversial, but during the encampment, I saw that a lot of college newspapers weren't representing Jewish perspectives. They were focused a lot on the big voices of the encampment, maybe focusing on Jewish students participating, Jewish professors participating, but not really seeing that full range. So during the encampment, I produced an article with the help of a lot of people, like Gabriel, to represent, I believe it was around 6 professors and students that had a Jewish identity, or connected with their Jewish identities, but fell in different perspectives relating to the encampment, from being extremely against it to feeling more neutral about it to being a member of the encampment themselves.
Yeah, and the Sun is obviously an institution on campus. We deal with the administration a lot. How do you think we can best serve our community dealing with the administration going forward? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that the role of a newspaper isn't necessarily to be friends with the administration. We're not trying to publicize them in the exact same light that they're publicizing themselves. However, I think that for both the administration and our readers, what serves them well is protecting truth, going to all extremes to make sure that we're getting perspectives from administrators, getting the facts right. And I think once that truth is established, even if we're publishing something that's a little bit more critical about administration or focuses on perspectives critical of administration, they can understand that we're coming from a place of truth, we're representing their perspectives as well, and then readers can believe that we're getting all sides of the story.
Yeah, and speaking of all sides of the story, we've gotten some criticism as a paper in the past couple months about, whether or not we have a certain leaning. What do you plan to do as editor-in-chief to kind of ensure the community that we are being as neutral as we can as an institution?
Yeah, that's a great question. And sometimes it's a bit difficult for us when Cornell itself feels like it's left-leaning, when it feels like some voices are more heard than others. So I think what it takes is intentional dialogue establishing those conversations, even if it's not for a specific article, but just talking to campus leaders from all ideological perspectives to ensure that they understand where the Sun's coming from, ensure how their voices can be heard in the paper, and so that we can answer any questions.
Stepping into EAC, obviously, we have a whole new board, and, we have new news editors and new managing people who are going to be stepping into the roles that you already had over the past couple of years. What advice do you have as a Sun veteran?
As a Sun veteran, for news editors, first of all, I miss being a news editor. Shout out to everyone who is a news writer under me when I led the on-campus and then administration beat. But for news editors, I would say that the thing that is most special about the position is your ability to form relationships with writers. We're learning paper. You get to be there every step of the way. For some people who have never written an article for a newspaper before, you get to teach them the fundamentals of angle, lead, sourcing, all these fun things. And I just hope that you get to enjoy every second of that process. Take a moment to realize how meaningful and rewarding the work you do is. For the managing editors, I think that that's one of the most difficult positions on this paper. And I think that something to keep in mind is it's always so focused on the little details, making sure the grammar's right, all the facts are correct. Sometimes it's really important to take a step back and observe as well, to see what other sections are up to see what's going on campus, to see how our coverage relates to prior coverage. and to just be creative. I think it's such a technical job, but that creativity is also really important.
Thank you so much. And in all these years working with you, you've also taught me a lot as well. So I'd like to ask you, what's the thing that you value the most in a student journalist?
The thing that I value the most in a student journalist, this kind of goes hand in hand, but curiosity and a willingness to learn. As a student journalist, there's so many learning curves. Even if you wrote for your high school newspaper, you'll never come into college really with that same burden, but also privilege of covering your own community in a way that national news cares about, national politics pays attention to. And it's intimidating when you know that your article might be cited in the New York Times. It might spark a protest. It's happened. And I think that what's so important is that patience to just be curious and to say, how could I be doing better? What does this editor know that I want to pick up as well? I think once you have that skill set, it doesn't matter where you come from, but you end up in the most helpful place to a paper because, again, as a learning paper, we're here to learn, and once you pick up those skills, they stick with you for life.
Thank you so much. And do you have anything else that you'd like to say to our readers?
As a student-led newspaper covering the student body, we answer to nobody but our readers. We do it for you. And we want to make sure that you feel a part of the conversation. If you notice something wrong with coverage, please reach out to the managing editor email account. If you want to contribute to the conversation, please email the associate editor. And if you have a tip, if you want it to be confidential, please submit it on our website or submit it to the news editor or editor-in-chief email accounts.
Thank you so much, Julia.
My pleasure.